What economic and investment principle did Ben Franklin, Albert Einstein, and Warren Buffett all agree on? You're about to find out. Quote, "Money makes money, and the money that money makes money." That was Benjamin Franklin, who lived in the 1700s. Our next quote is, "Compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it. He who doesn't pays it." That was Albert Einstein, who lived from the late 1800s to the mid 1900s. And finally, our last quote is, "My wealth has come from a combination of living in America, some lucky genes, and compound interest." That's Warren Buffett, born in 1930 and still alive today. Whenever three geniuses in their respective fields all agree about something, it's probably safe to say it's worth understanding what they're talking about, which in this case is the power of compound interest to grow monetary resources to unimaginable heights over time. Hi, I'm Todd, and this is the On Wealth and Progress podcast. If you're interested in balanced, factually supported commentary for a better future, you've come to the right place. Now, in recent posts, we've covered how the artificial intelligence revolution, under the right system, has the potential to reignite the kind of compounding economic growth we've experienced in past periods of extraordinary change, like the Industrial Revolution. In particular, we've discussed A, how the sustained growth of the limited government era, which lasted from 1800 to 1930, created unprecedented upward mobility for all classes of society, even as we experienced enormous social, economic, and geopolitical change during the Industrial Revolution. We've also discussed that era was characterized by nominal regulation, little to no inflation, minimal government spending, balanced budgets, and low peacetime federal debts. Now, in addition, we've also been discussing B, how we left the limited government model behind, not because it had somehow become obsolete or had failed, on the contrary, but instead because contemporary America came to mistakenly blame the Great Depression on private market failure. Unfortunately, it took decades to understand that the real causes of the Depression were failures of government on a monumental scale, consistent with the magnitude of the downturn they created. And third, or C, we've been discussing how the misguided progressive economic agenda of the New Deal dramatically delayed the recovery from the Depression relative to what had happened during the limited government era, and then put us on a path of increasing government intervention that over time has led to inflations, high government spending, chronic budget deficits, and dangerous debts. All of which brings us back to the importance of compound growth. In addition to helping us operate with little inflation and safe levels of debt, the limited government model also unleashed meaningfully higher rates of growth than what the progressive system has led to. After growing 3.8% annually, and most importantly, compounded, and that's a real rate of return above the rate of inflation, but after growing at 3.8% a year for 130 years during the limited government era, the failures of the ever-escalating progressive interventions have left us with just annual growth of just 2.2% over the last 2+ decades. Now, fortunately, the Trump administration's Regulation Light AI Action Plan enhances the opportunity for artificial intelligence's revolution to reignite the kind of economic growth and upward mobility we've experienced in the past, like during the Industrial Revolution. But even after hearing the illustrious testimony cited earlier, it can still be difficult to appreciate how compounding affects the economy as a whole and what that means for us as individuals investors. In future episodes, we'll focus more on how compound growth affects investors and saving. But this week, let's look at a few examples that show how even seemingly small differences in relatively low rates of growth can have profound impacts on living standards over time. Let's take a short break, and then we'll be back to discuss the dramatic impact that compound growth has on living standards over long periods of time. Let's imagine two separate families, each of which owns a business generating $100,000 in annual pre-tax income. Like what's happened with our overall economy during the last couple of decades, we'll assume that what I'll call the progressive family business grows at 2.2% per year. In contrast, we'll assume that the second family's income grows at the limited government rate of 3.8% annually, compounded. Both of these are compounded, just to be clear. Now, let's consider how what sounds like a small difference in growth affects the future living standards of these two families and their descendants. Even though the two families start with the same income of $100,000, after 2 decades of 2.2% growth, the progressive family income has increased to $155,000. But the higher growth experienced by the limited government family has pushed their income up to $210,000 a year, or over a third greater than the slower growing neighbors. Needless to say, the limited government family already has more to spend on safety, education, and medical care, as well as more money left over for family vacations and entertainment. But as impressive as these differences are, they pale in comparison to what happens over longer periods of time. In fact, after 50 years, the difference in living standards is truly remarkable. Whereas the progressive family business now generates $297,000 of annual income, the limited government family is earning $645,000, or more than double their progressive counterparts. Obviously, the differences in living standards that were already apparent after just 2 decades have become even more dramatic after 5. As you'll recall, however, the growth during the limited government era was sustained for 130 years. So let's take a look at the differences in the two family businesses over this longer time horizon. After 130 years, the progressive family income seems impressive. Remember, it's growing at 2.2% a year compounded, and it has increased from $100,000 to $1.7 million. But this pales in comparison to the limited government family, which is now generating, believe it or not, almost $13 million annually, or 7.5 times that of the progressive family. Because of the power of what Einstein called the 8th wonder of the world, the limited government family not only has enormously greater resources available to help provide for its safety, education, medical needs, and entertainment, but it also has substantially more available to help others. Let's take another quick break, and then we'll come back with a short example of how all this affects the economy as a whole. Okay, we've been talking about our limited government and our progressive family differences in income over time, because the limited government is growing at 3.8% a year and the family's income is growing at 2.2% a year. And in fact, if we wanted to have some slightly devious fun with that, we could round the numbers off and add a six-pack of zeros and then find and ask a progressive economist which is better off. A progressive nation with $2 trillion in GDP that runs chronic deficits, experiences recurring bouts of inflation, and has run its debt up to 100% of GDP, or B, a limited government nation with $13 trillion of resources, running budget surpluses, experiencing little or no inflation, and with federal debt at just 5% of GDP. To borrow from an old saying, we might expect our economist friend to say something like, well, yes, I suppose a limited government system does seem a bit better in practice, but in theory, and then they might go on and talk about theoretical differences. But putting our dismal economist aside, the compounding power of higher growth rates shows both the importance of starting early for savers and investors and the importance of implementing and maintaining government policies that are conducive to growth for nations as a whole. If we can reignite this type of growth again during the artificial intelligence revolution, it will help us work our way out of the dangerous deficits, debts, and inflations that progressive economics has saddled us with, while also giving us the means to reinvigorate upward mobility and protect our families and freedoms both at home and throughout the world. Today, we face important challenges, but none that are greater than those we have overcome time and again throughout our storied history. Here's to hoping your day is as bright as America's future. I'm Todd Sheets, and thanks for your interest. If you found this helpful, please subscribe and recommend it to at least one other person. If you'd like to learn more and to find links to my free On Wealth and Progress newsletter and my book, please visit my website, toddsheetswriter.com. Thanks again.